Hi, Enrique. We are live now. We can start now.
Can we start now?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen first. Okay. Can you share my screen? Great. So, this is going to be a webinar about developing friendly backends with ktor. We'll show in a few minutes how can we have our backend app and running and serving endpoints and using a couple of the features that ktor allow us. Very shortly about me, I'm a Android Kotlin Google developer expert, freelance engineer. I'm the author of Android High Performance. I have 12 years Android experience, Java on the backend, Kotlin, TensorFlow, and Ruby on Rails, among others. And what's ktor? Ktor is a web engine that the official definition from JetBrains is that it's easy to use, fun, and asynchronous. Fun is always very personal and subjective valoration, but it can be. And allows us to create DSL web services with Kotlin. Essentially, it works like follows. We have an application, and within this application, we'll have our Yeti. Okay, I think I'm on the wrong screen, so you cannot see the. Yeah, well, anyway, you'll miss the animations, but yeah. Well, we'll have an application. This application will have some sort of web engine like Yeti, Apache, etc. We will be using features within this application provided by ktor. Those features can be different things. Can be things such as routines, serialization, and authentication. They came out of the box with ktor, and we'll see how it works now. So let's gonna came to our or wait, yeah, our Android, our IntelliJ. ktor connects particularly well with IntelliJ, so that's the engine the environment I would recommend you to use to work with ktor. So if we came to IntelliJ and create a new project, we see that we already have this, we can select a ktor project, and we have a few of the templates and features that we would like to add. I'm going to add just a couple of them that we will explore later, but we see that we can start using some HTML DSLs. We can use free markers and use templates to serve the client. We can use things such as routing, basic authentication, etc. So we really have a lot of possibilities. By selecting this would essentially create the build Gradle, add the packages to Gradle, so we can start using them. Now let's gonna start here with a ktor example package, for example, and we'll store this in ktor webinar. So now if I click on finish, this will start creating my project. We click here on OK, just to have some sort of default setup. Okay, I'm gonna open this other project I have with some samples code on the other screen, so I can take them as reference. Yeah, and let's get into the project we just created and see the structure. Let's gonna remove this since it's not relevant right now, and we can check it out later. We'll have a module. This is the main entry point for the app, together with obviously the main function, where we can, where here we specify that we will be using Netty as the main engine. And by default, we create a few things with the features we have specified at the beginning. Here we have this application conf file that defines the port that we're going to be starting and the application module. We'll have as well some templates that we have specified when we've said that we would like to use these free markers, as well as an application test that we can start using for writing our test. So in this case, we would prove that there is a function that serves over the method get in this endpoint, so just in the root folder, a string called hello world. So now let's come back to our application. 1 second. And let's start writing now some code. So we could start serving an endpoint that is, we'll call it hello world, and it would essentially just be answering like with a hello message every time we want. So we will be using this routing block here, and we think we have to specify our calls. We're gonna have something like again point that goes into the, for example, the hello. And this endpoint will have something called, okay. Oh, yeah. We'll have an object called call. This object is the object that handles all the responses and requests. And we could have something that call the function respond text that is going to answer something like hello world. And we would need to specify as well the content type we want to send. This is important so we know that we're sending JSON or text or whatever we need to send at that moment. So is this right here? Yeah, yes, I'm writing a block here. It's not a block what we need to send. And we'll specify the content type as just plain text. So yeah, we have this here, right? So great. Let's gonna run this function now, or let's gonna run this as the application ktor. I'm gonna have here Postman on the side, so we can execute requests with Postman and see if they're working or not, or what are we getting delivered. Okay, so very easy. In a few lines, we see that we're already running the our ktor engine, and it's already running on this URL from here. So if we came and we call the function hello, very easy. This is a gate to hello. We see that we are already we're receiving this hello world here. So very easy to get it already running. And let's gonna check now, for example, how to use the HTML DSL that we specified later. So we're gonna create another function in this case called, for instance, HTML DSL. This function will make use of the same called object that we have done before. And here in this case, we will respond an HTML instead of a text. I see that here was specifying the text, and we will send here an HTML within this block from here. Now, something very interesting is that we can use, as mentioned, these DSLs to. Can I tell you it's a bit wonky now? We can specify now these DSLs to generate HTML code. So it's super comfortable. We just can specify body, then that means that here the body of our web app will start. Now we can set an H1 and paint something like, for instance, HTML, and then we think we can start writing a list of elements. So we can start doing something like for n 1 to 10, for instance, we will be painting a list of elements. So let's see if I make it right with all the string templates. I think this should be about right. So this is very comfortable and follows a little bit everything that we're having now in all the tech walls, such as SwiftUI and Android Compose, where we're using DSLs to essentially paint the content of our web app. That's comfortable to do. We don't need a big setup. And let's see how this would look if we compile, restart our web app, and call this endpoint from here. Okay, this should be now about right. So now we're going to substitute here for this HTML DSL and see that we are, well, here is not painting anything, of course, because we wrote from 1 to 0 instead of 1 to 10. But if we restart, this would essentially create a list now of elements 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10. As we see here. We can also use the CSS DSL, so we could also like add any sort of design that we create, so it's very comfortable. And what can we do next? We could, yeah, let's gonna do some authentication, for example. We also can access directly different types of authentication from ktor. And one of them that is very useful is, for instance, to use the basic authentication, right? So we need to provide some sort of username and password in order to be able to access our app or different points from our app, etc. So we will need to install a feature here. This feature is going to be the feature authentication from ktor. Do I have too many parentheses? Yes, I do have too many. And here within install, we would need to specify that, yeah, the one we're going to use is the basic authentication. Then this includes, requires an object that is called realm, that we can call my realm. And in order to validate, we need to do the following. So we could do something like if the name that we're providing is named to is same as, for instance, user. And we don't need a comma here. And the password is just password. Then I'm good with parentheses so far. So we could make something like user ID principal, then would be user, and otherwise it could be no. Let's see how this actually works. Yeah, no companion error. So I have installed the basic authentication. That's good. Now I would need to specify within this authenticate the endpoints that are protected by the authentication. So here we would need, let's say, hello out, for example. And within this block, I'll have something like, yeah, great. I'll call the respond text, and then I will paint something like out hello, and the content type will be content type dot text dot plain. So this is gonna prove that I'm using this out. Let's see now how could we do this on Postman. So let's gonna start a new request. This request would be the same as before, but pointing to hello out. And we would need to have user as in basic authentication as the user and as password here. So if we start this now, we see that we will be connecting to, yeah, we need to restart the client first. Now it's running, and if we start now this request, we'll see that we're accessing 200.0.0, but what happens if we don't specify or we specify another user here? We receive a 401 unauthorized, so we see that the authentication is actually working. Now we could use as well, well, we've used the HTML DSLs. We can also use markers coming from templates. So we specify this at the beginning, and essentially that works as we can specify as a template. It would be the case for this index.ftl file that, well, essentially is a list where we pass items. And we could have like different templates to present websites, and we could be accessing them directly from our application. So now let's gonna install another module. We will install the module free marker. And this module has a template loader that we need to initialize. So this template loader is going to be something like class.java.class loader here, and then we would need to specify where are our templates, right? That sounds like about right. Great. So let's gonna create now that this means that the endpoint is installed, right? So let's gonna create another endpoint here that is going to be called HTML free marker. Great. So this endpoint would be, okay, I'm not breaking anything. That's good. Right. This endpoint would be calling again the call object that we've already used, and in this case we'll be respond, passing. In this case, we will be using a free marker content. This is something particular from this feature where it receives two parameters. The first one is the template file that we've seen before. Yeah, right. And then we would need to specify a set of data that we're going to pass. Now, let's gonna just make something easy, like let's gonna create some data of, well, first let's gonna create a data class here within the data. That's something very simple. It could be like a class that receives a list of integers. Great. And where I was here, and then we'll just initialize this passing a standard map from a list in Kotlin. So the data object will be transformed into this index data class that we have just created, and this receives a list of items, for example, 1, 2, 3. And I think the next here should be the tag we want to pass. Okay, this sounds like about right. So essentially, this response need to receive one message. In this case, we're going to use the constructor of the free marker content feature that we have installed, where we pass the template and some set of data. In this case, it's going to be a list of this index data class that we have created, and this list contains the element 1, 2, and 3. If we restart our web app, and we call this endpoint from here, I think we don't need any auth, no auth. This would be essentially taking this file from here that we have presented, and it will be creating the elements that we have passed as data. So again, that can be we can define like an entire HTML using CSS if we need, etc., and be able to provide beautiful content and fill it programmatically. So it's very convenient to have. Now, the last example, something that we obviously need to do in any web app is to operate with databases. So I'm going to open my MAMP server here. This essentially provides me some Apache if I need, and some MySQL server. Great. So, and I'm gonna see, I prepared this before, obviously, but we have inside this SQL repository a database called myTestDB, and within this database, I have one table for user that includes one. The user has essentially an ID, a name, an email. Now, how would we do this? We would, well, first we need to connect start the connection to the database. We're gonna do this here through, I think we need to change this a little bit. So now we're gonna extend this method where we, that's the entry point to our app. So we'll keep calling this engine main, passing the arguments, but let's gonna create a function called init the database. I copy this function here because it's a little bit long. And this essentially connects to my local database and specifies my password, my user, the endpoint, the Unicode, and the driver. I also copied here somewhere the classes I need to copy on my build Gradle. This was not provided as a feature. I need to add them separately. So let me add here under DB staff all the classes I need. And essentially, I'm going to have the MySQL connector for Java, an exposed package of JetBrains that allows me to operate with the database and do a few other things, and JSON from Google, so I can serialize my my data. So now this should be already imported. Great. I'll add it, and essentially this function just connects and writes on the screen that it has connected. Now, what else do we need? We would need, well, an endpoint that lists of all the users. We could have something like this: get users, and this endpoint will, well, it's going to create also a function somewhere else. But could write it under the GP. So we are going to write first a function that connects to the database and give us the top 5 users from the database, for instance, as a string. Great. So how this starts? We will have first a variable JSON where we are going to store all the thing that we're going to return later as the value of the function. And then within this transaction, this is a transaction from the database. So everything that is performed as a transaction should be within this block. We'll start doing something like about users. Well, we first need to create a user object. That's going to be a good point here. So this is essentially the user that that represents the value on the database. We'll connect to the table called user. That's the one that I have some previously here on SQL Prom. Table user, ID, name, and email. Those are the fields we need. We'll import the table exposed from JetBrains. And now we'll have the ID as an integer. Yeah, so far so good. Val name as a bar chart of call name and with a length of, let's say, 50 elements. That's good. I think I have, yeah, one extra parenthesis. And then we'll have the email, which will be a bar chart email as well of length 50. Great. So everything good so far. And then coming back to the users here, we'll have, yeah, so a particular, or the variables users is going to be, if we call to this object, would be user, select all of them. So that essentially will bring the entire table, order by, and here we can specify the how do we want to order those users? So for example, we could say order them by ID, and we can use a sort of order descendant or ascendant, and we could limit it to 5, for instance. So this is very comprehensive, and here we can start like using any sort of SQL expressions to limit and refine a little bit our search. So while we have this thing over there, we have here these, we've already queried them. So we're going to have an array of type response where we are going to store all our users. Yeah. Wait. Yeah, well, I would need a first data class to represent it. That's the data class that is essentially going to be sent to the via the web service to the user. So here it's similar, very similar to the previous one. We would essentially have an email, a string, name as an ID. That's right here. Yes, so we'll have this database, this here. Great. And what we're going to do for all the users we have in this response, it's add them to the response object. So we'll make something like response, add a new users where the ID is equal to, we're going to take this element from the database. So that's right. And it's great. And we'll do the same for name and email. So the email would be the field email, the name would be the field name, and I think I have one extra. That sounds like about right. Great. So where I have operate over all of them, I'll create my JSON, or I'll assign to my JSON the, in this case, I'm going to return a JSON value instead of, because it makes sense to be handled by other entities, and I'll pass the response to this. So this essentially will JSONify my response, and here I will be returning it. Great. So just to see it a little bit again, to get the top user data, I have this SQL transaction. I query all the users to the database. I store them in a response object. I JSONify this response, and I return it. So now if we came back to the endpoint that I started to create here, users, this will call the function respond text. And within this function, the first parameter is the get top user data, where I'm getting the all the users from the database. But in this case, I'm going to specify the content type as an application JSON, so it will be automatically parsed as the response. So let's gonna execute this again. And when I execute this, I can come back to Postman and write here users. It's not yet done, I think, right now. Great, connected to the database. And now seems to be fully deployed. So I can query the users, right? Great. So what happens if I add more users, for instance? I could add John, though now it's on the database. And if I query it, I'll be getting both Don, Joe, and etc. If I input more than 5, it will be changed. It will not be, they will not be displayed. And see that this is also being sent as we came here to the header, she's delivered as an application JSON. If I would not be doing that and just sending the text as a plain text, it would be displayed just as plain text, and that's obviously not what we want, because here we can have this very nice formatting. Postman understand it. Most of our plugins for the browser will be able to understand it. But now if it's just text, it gets very ugly as a standard text, and it would be the same on the backend. Sorry, on the browser. Wiki on raw is just this standard text file, so we would need to have some sort of plugin that interprets it. And well, I think that's everything for today. Well, if you came here to the documentation, ktor.io, you can see all the samples and many more things that you can actually do with ktor. You would have something like, I think, if you Google for ktor features, you have things that says, well, default request, cookies, you can apply redirect, proxy, timeout, user agents, you can operate with WebSockets. You have more information about the different engines. In this case, we were using Yeti, but you can use Apache or any other one that would be relevant for you. There is as well support for multi-platform, so you can use the ktor as well on Android and iOS, just the client, obviously, not the server. And you have a bunch of examples that we can use to start getting operated with it. I like particularly ktor a lot because, as you've seen, in 30 minutes, we have essentially something very simple and running and doesn't really require too much setup. You can deploy it very easily to Google Apps and Heroku. It's very easy. Like I think I'll have it somewhere on my console, but I think ktor deploy, yeah, here. It's very easy to do it as well. You can do the same for Heroku. It doesn't take too much setup to run it. So you can, within a few minutes, be already playing with a very nice web server. I particularly like a lot how good you can use the DSLs to generate dynamic content. So yeah, it's something that you might want to check out. If you're already using Kotlin, you might find it very easy and very immediate to start getting used to this. It follows some other, like if you have experience with other web frameworks, I think it's also not really hard to start using. And I think it combines very nicely DSLs and simplicity. So Kevin, I think that was everything. If there is any question that anybody was asking, let me write you on our group. I think I should be able to see questions on the chat, but yeah, I only see questions from. Okay, if anybody has a question and wants to write it, super happy to take a look. If you have questions you want to, you can write me later in Twitter. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, I guess no questions so far. So I hope you enjoyed and you learned something new today. And feel free to contact me if there is anything that is not clear for you. Bye-bye.